Hi there, my name is Brandy Addison and I teach Longform Journalism at Texas Tech. This is a re-recording of the January 17th introductory lecture on what is longform journalism and who are the pioneers. The transcription is nearly identical to that from class but has been edited for clarity and time in addition to the removal of student voices. For those of you who missed the January 17th class, I want to begin with reminders and updates. First things first, assignment number 1 is due January 26th at 11:59 p.m. But I decided since I will not be jumping into grammar, spelling, and punctuation that I'm going to push back that deadline to January 29th, Sunday, at 11:59 p.m. I feel that's only fair, just because we really haven't gotten to the basics, and I want to ensure y'all get the time to incorporate what y'all learned from Tuesday's lecture. Additionally, if you missed the first class, I did announce that if everyone averaged a 90, I'm just going to give a full 100 to the entire class. With that said, I expect that there's no outliers below an 85. I don't think it would be fair if someone got a 72 and another person got a 98 and then everyone ended up with a 100. So no outliers below 85. I really feel that's probably fair there. Additionally, I have y'all's first reading assignment due by the time we begin class Thursday. It's called Shitty First Drafts. And I also ask that you answer the prompt in your syllabus by the time class begins. This week's prompt is, what is the biggest writing flaw you hope to overcome by the end of this course? For me, I really want to get better at deciding, especially in regards to long form, what pitches are worth 1,200 words and which pitches are worth, 500 words. Sometimes I get a little in over my head and get a little too excited about some passion projects, I guess, story ideas, and they just don't really come to fruition. So just being able to decipher that. Additionally, I hope switching from passive writing to active writing becomes a lot more natural to me. Now I still have to review every single word I write, and still am ensuring that I transition and switch things over, so I hope it comes natural by the end of the semester. Additionally, you should have received an email about the Zoom sign-up sheet. In addition to 3 missed class periods, I also allow Zoom sign-ups on lecture days. This is just, if you decide, hey, I really don't want to get out of bed, I'm going to hop in on Zoom, and that saves you a missed class. But also, I imagine some of y'all will be going out of town for spring break. So if you know that you don't want to travel back, or I'm your first class for the week, go ahead and sign up there, and you can come in a little later. So, yeah. Additionally, I feel like I went really quickly through the syllabus last week, and I didn't really emphasize my expectations for the class. I did tell y'all that I basically wanted everything to be a passion project for y'all. I really wanted to see y'all's passion spill out onto the pages, right? Or laptop, I guess. I don't have any limitations whatsoever or restrictions, aside from, just not being hateful towards a group of individuals. With that said, if you support gun ownership and you want to make that your case for that during your op-ed, that's fine. I'm not going to tell you you can't. But if you're going to tell me why all women should be eradicated, that's going to be unacceptable. This is a non-biased, non-partisan course, so whatever you want to write, you have free reign. With that said, I really want to emphasize, again, going back to our class expectations, that our goals as journalists, and this is what I want y'all to really remember as we take on this class, which is probably going to be one of the more creative courses you've taken this semester. Our goal, we only have 3 goals, right? And I've reiterated this on Twitter and in circles, and basically anytime I talk about journalism. And it's not to become famous, and it's certainly not to become wealthy, as we all know. But for me, there should be no motive of being a journalist than to inform your audience, keep your audience safe and protected, and then hold accountable those who have imposed or forced some injustices on individuals within our community or audience, or anyone at all. With that said, I know that some of y'all have different aspirations, entertainment, music, journalism, sports journalism, and that doesn't necessarily overlap in every single piece. With that said, there's plenty of opportunity to do that. So I just want y'all to keep this in mind, that y'all's goal is not to, be famous. It's to just be informative. Beyond our holistic mission as journalists, I only have 3 requirements under class expectations. First and foremost is that I require you to report the truth. In our field, it is absolutely essential that we report truth in everything. This means we don't blatantly report false information, we don't skew information based on source selection, and we don't leave out any details that would provide additional context or change, the story. I've seen it firsthand that even the slightest error, intentional or unintentional, can completely change the direction of a journalist's career. Because, once you make those mistakes, it just ends up diminishing your credibility as a journalist, and that's what your entire career stands on, right? So I also want to really emphasize that regardless of how small the story is, you need to be fact-checking every single thing. Because we want our community, for instance, I covered the Midland Odessa shooting 6 months out of college. We want our community to know that when we say, hey, there was one shooter and he is no longer at risk, that they can trust us when we say that they are no longer in danger. And on the other hand, we want them to say, hey, if there's still a shooter at large, we want them to trust us to not go outside, right? To not put themselves at risk when we're saying that. We want them to be able to believe that. So every single story you write, regardless of how mundane you may feel it is, it's essential that you get everything accurate. Of course, we all make mistakes. Own up to them, apologize, hold yourself accountable. I think that's the only way to recover that. But we want to make sure we don't do it in the first place. Next, we're going to report with fairness. I actually took the definition or the mission of reporting with fairness from NPR Ethics Handbook because I really just couldn't have written it better. So it says, to tell the truest story possible, it is essential that we treat those we interview and report on with scrupulous fairness, guided by a spirit of professionalism. We make every effort to gather responses from those who are subjects of criticism, unfavorable allegations, or other negative assertions in our stories. What we broadcast and put online is edited for time and clarity. Whenever we quote, edit, or otherwise interpret what people tell us, we aim to be faithful to their meaning, so our stories ring true to those we interview. In all of our stories, especially matters of controversy, we strive to consider the strongest arguments we can find on all sides, seeking to deliver both nuance and clarity. Our goal is to not please those whom we report on, or to produce stories that create the appearance of balance, but to seek the truth. Of course, this does go back to reporting with truth. So that's that. Now, NPR had a list of guidelines that they go by to ensure fairness. First, our sources shouldn't be surprised by how they're represented. So this means that whenever we go interview a source, let's say we're going to go interview a school board official, and we want to talk to them about academic success or progress in their testing, right? We're not going to go turn around and write a story about racism within the schools based on any response that they might have given us, right? If that's the case, we need to tell them, hey, the story might have changed, especially since they agreed to the interview on a completely different topic. It's one of those things about having the community trust us, and that includes our sources. Don't let sources offer anonymous opinions of others. Present facts, not indictments. Give sources time to respond. This one is really important to me because I know that it felt like it was just always a competition in Dallas-Fort Worth. Everyone wanted to be the first to report something. For me, especially in this class, it is not, and I know y'all aren't, on deadline, like as if you were a breaking news reporter. But regardless, it's essential for me that we are the best and we are the most accurate, not the first. I will take accuracy over timeliness any single day. And I think most editors, producers would agree to that because as I've noticed, if you have an error in a story just because you wanted to be the first, that diminishes our credibility. And it's not just one journalist. If we are basically a boat, right? And it requires all of us to row for us to succeed. If one person lets go, we're going to start to sink. That's how a newsroom works. So when one person makes an error, it's going to reflect on every single one of us. So that's something for me. Give sources time to respond. Don't leave them a voicemail and then write a line that says they didn't immediately answer. Go ahead and give them time to respond. Additionally, know that our word is binding. Okay, so when we use anonymous sources, for instance, if someone wanted to go do a day in the life of a drug dealer, right, for their immersion story, and they use a pseudonym, the source agrees to speak anonymously or under a pseudonym, well, we're going to stick with that, right? So if a police officer, LPD sees your story and they ask who it is, you're going to be willing to go to jail for this person, right? Because this is our jobs as journalists, is to protect our sources. Additionally, it's also just a legal issue. If you agreed and that happened, where you said their name and you got them arrested, you can be sued for that. So if that's not something that you're willing to do, if you're not willing to go to jail for your sources, don't report on those types of stories. The last two, help our sources understand our work and attribute generously and respect fair use. I really appreciated that last one because they actually had it under a little header called supporting our colleagues or something along those lines. And they're not just talking about their NPR colleagues, they're talking about their colleagues in the entire industry. And I've noticed recently, especially as we go towards more digital, that attributions are sparingly used. Especially when it comes to attributing to other newspapers. So I really appreciated them that. I've had a couple stories basically, stolen from me, and I did not receive attribution. Snopes even fact-checked one, and I was the one who broke the news, yet they used two other sources to fact-check it. Regardless, this is something really essential. I always want y'all to attribute and cite the original source. Y'all don't have to use the reporter's name. I think just newspaper recognition and link will work. Lastly, I want y'all to report with passion. It's not about being perfect. This class certainly isn't, and journalism isn't. Storytelling should feel natural, and your work should reflect that, and that only comes with passion. I've said it time and time again, journalism is fluid, and what it looks like today looks so different from, the 60s, right? You don't have to fit perfectly within the standards anymore. To get to ESPN or 60 Minutes or the New York Times, wherever you want to be, you're going to have to do some out-of-the-box thinking. And perhaps you're not going to want to push the boundaries, but you're going to want to move them. That's how every single journalist, most journalists that ended up there did it. They weren't sticking to textbook journalism. They were pushing their creativity. So I fully believe if we want to restore the credibility that this industry has lost over the years, that's not going to happen if we're hyper-focusing on age-old rules. AP style is not law. Journalistic structure is not law. The only thing that's law is reporting with truth and fairness and balance. And I want y'all to remember that. And going back to fairness real quick, I should have noted this, but I don't want y'all to, when y'all talk to sources, to feel like y'all have to go back with he said, she said, because y'all can do that till the cows come home, right? Y'all, as NPR said, will choose the strongest arguments, and y'all are going to have evidence to support them, and this includes data and documents, right? You can keep going back and forth with sources all day, and everyone has their own perception. So stick with what the evidence shows you. Okay, now back to reporting with passion. As I said, the only thing that's law is reporting with truth and fairness. So I gave a couple personal examples of some things that were a little out there that probably wouldn't have been accepted 30 years ago in the world of journalism, like this headline, monarch migration is in Texas, but wait, is this all of them? All drought, no cattle. I thought that was funny instead of all hat, no cattle. Growing the gourd standard instead of the gold standard. And then I had this lead that said the monarch migration has landed in Texas. But wait, is this all of them? Where did all the butterflies go? Okay, so I feel like that's a lead that really captured people's attention. And they're like, yeah, wait, where did all the butterflies go? This one is really funny and still my most well-read story. Maybe not well-read, most read story throughout my career. So I don't know if y'all remember, but an Allen resident had posted on Twitter his wife looking really sad because she didn't get her shredded cheese, and she wouldn't eat her fajitas without her shredded cheese in the middle of the pandemic, right? And everyone, of course, roasted him. So then I had a story, and my editor helped me with this, and it said, after an Allen resident posted about his wife's long wait for cheese for her fajitas, he wasn't prepared for the response from Twitter users. They shredded him. Okay, that's really funny. The Dallas Zoo and a Fort Worth company have partnered to create a product that's nothing to sniff at, zoo poo. So they created a product that was literally compost from the zoo animals' feces. So that one's funny. But I also have some examples from others. It's actually Angel, who is the social media editor, or one of the social media editors at the Washington Post, that made me think like, so what is long-form journalism? As its name suggests, well, it's long. Some may consider long-form more than 700 words, like the Dallas Morning News, while others may see it as 1,200 words, like the Lubbock Avalanche Journal, and others see it as more than 3,000 words, like Fort Worth Magazine. The most I've written was 4,000 words. I was given 3 months and used probably a dozen sources in it. It was on another mass shooting that occurred. It was on the anniversary of the mass shooting at the West Freeway Church of Christ in the White Settlement. I don't know if y'all remember seeing that video, but the security guard had taken the shooter down within like 6 seconds, but they had already killed 2 individuals. So I met up with that man, and he told me his story, and we just did an anniversary story. Understanding the basics of long form. More often than not, long form coincides with magazine writing, or at the very least feature writing. And although it does absolutely appear in newspapers, it's often enterprise stories that take several weeks to several months to complete. And I'd also like to point out that it's probably more of a freelance thing. Like, of course, staff journalists do report long-form stories. But honestly, the way that industry is right now, I feel like everyone's just scrambling to put out so many stories because of staff shortages, that it's really hard to do a long-form story because you're producing a lot of smaller stories a week. So I feel like it's more of a freelance thing, and that's why I have that in a lecture at the end of the semester. Long form isn't limited to one beat or one topic. It's everywhere from sports journalism to human profiles to health features to, gonzo journalism. Typically, it's not breaking news or event coverage. And while we're on this, it could be day 2, follow stories. So, and I really want to stress that, especially those of y'all who are in internships right now, if you know how to produce quality day 2 coverage on a major event, you are going to be so fantastic for any newsroom out there. Right now, as I noted, everyone is just scrambling to keep up with so much news that a lot of things aren't being covered past day 1, right? You're having to go from one breaking news event to the next breaking news event. So if you get the opportunity this semester or in your internship, whenever you complete it, to go do a day 2 story after a major event, follow up, keep answering questions that weren't answered. People still, the thing is, people still want answers to what happened, but news is happening so quickly that reporters aren't having the time to answer those questions, right? So volunteer to do that. I think any newsroom would appreciate that. Understanding the basics continued. The goal of long form is not to hit your word count with nuanced and insignificant writing. The goal of long form is to tell the complete story. This means every single thing you include should be supplemental to the purpose of the story. Frankly, every detail should have its own role. Okay, so if we're talking about, I guess, for instance, there was an incident when I was at Tarleton with a professor who had just done some really weird stuff with students, and it made international news. We want to report what his house looked like, what his backyard looked like, where he took his students, what his office looked like, were there any weird books on the shelves, right? Every single detail matters in long-form journalism, and it contributes to the entire story. Sorry, Maddie's got a little cold, and she's in the background. Additionally, I noticed, so whenever I hate to go back to the Midland, Odessa shooting, but whenever that happened, there was a story about the shooter's home. And so it was basically a shack, and it was run down, and that detail was included in stories. It was included that he didn't have running water, that it was pretty cluttered and filthy. And then they also include an anecdote about how he would sit on his roof and shoot from, birds from his roof. So just things like that. No, that wasn't part of the story of the shooting, but it contributed to the entire story because there was obviously things wrong, right? So just details like that. Also, there's almost always a story included within your own story. This means whether we're investigating air quality issues on the east side, the depletion of the Ogallala Aquifer, the 0.5-star, maybe 0.6-star by now, to Texas Tech's basketball's Big 12 play, sexual assault on campus, whatever. We're going to share their experiences of someone impacted, right? So if you want to go talk to a basketball player, you need to ask him how he's truly feeling about this, right? Talk to him about his dreams to play collegiate basketball and what that means to him to have a 0.6 start. Or for instance, the Ogallala Aquifer. So I've been talking to farmers about how they think they're no longer going to be able to irrigate crops. They're going to have to go with dryland. And dryland pretty much suffered in drought. So, one farmer was just like, we're dying out here. That's it. That's going to be it. I don't want to have to choose between farming and drinking water. But at this point, we're not going to have any crops either. I also just did a story on air quality issues in the east side. I don't know if y'all know, but the city plan back in the 1940s intentionally placed our city's industrial zone within predominantly Black and Mexican communities, because verbatim it says that it is not appropriate for white families to live in. So now the city is implementing air qualities and placing them around the city, primarily on the east side. And I want to tell the stories of those who now have family members that are 90% asthmatic, and they believe it's because they have hazardous pollutants in the air next to them, right? So we're going to tell those types of stories. That includes investigative work, whatever. Some of the best websites for long-form journalism include ProPublica, Southerly, The New Yorker, New York Times Magazine, and The Atlantic. I really like New York Times Magazine a lot. I appreciate that they almost always include a really cool interactive with their long form because they understand people like me don't really have the attention span to go through 4,000 word stories, right? So they almost always have interactive pieces or data pieces, whatever. So I really appreciate that. I, too, do not love reading. I know a lot of y'all have a hard time reading y'all's assignments, so I think these are really great sources here. Okay, so who were the pioneers of long-form journalism? Now, I don't know if there was a single pioneer of long-form journalism, but there are different forms of journalism under long-form. So this includes gonzo journalism. Gonzo journalism is a style of journalism that is written without claims of objectivity, often including the reporter as part of the story, using a first-person narrative. The word gonzo is believed to have been first used in 1970 to describe an article about the Kentucky Derby by Hunter S. Thompson, who popularized the style. It is an energetic first-person participatory writing style in which the author is a protagonist, and it draws its power from a combination of social critique and self-attire. This is Hunter S. Thompson. He is my king. He is not to be confused with Hunter S. Thompson, play on words there, who I dressed as for Halloween. But he really, when I talk about pushing the boundaries of journalism, not pushing them, he crossed them. He fully crossed them. He did that. He went with the Hells Angels, and he was basically, unofficially inducted into their gang or group or whatever you want to consider it, until he reported on them raping women. So he got his ass beat for it, right? So there's definitely some repercussions for gonzo journalism, but I think this is a great example of long-form journalism. He ended up writing books about his experiences, so we got that. Advocacy journalism. So advocacy journalism is a genre of journalism that adopts a non-objective viewpoint, usually for some social or political purpose. Some advocacy journalists reject that the traditional ideal of objectivity is possible or practical, in part due to the perceived influence of corporate sponsors and advertising. Okay, so this is Ida B. Wells. She was a civil rights journalist, and she's an absolute queen. Again, I don't know if she's necessarily the pioneer of advocacy journalism, but she's one of the most notable journalists in history, so of course I had to include her. And since we're talking about advocacy journalism, I do know that, a couple of our students want to do investigative work, or they want to do social injustice journalism, right? They really want to focus on civil rights issues. I, myself, am really passionate about climate, and I consider myself an environmental journalist. But on the other side, I'm an agricultural journalist, and it feels like both my audiences are on the opposite ends of the spectrum. So this is where I go back to reporting with balance and fairness. Now, I don't believe civil rights is a partisan issue at all. Civil rights are just that. It's literally the right to live in peace without any disturbances, right? So I am not going to frown upon anyone doing advocacy journalism when it comes to social rights issues. And I don't expect any climate journalism to be like, hell yeah, the earth's on fire, right? That's just not going to happen. The climate crisis is also not a partisan issue. It is the earth, right? Like we're living on it. It's all of our homes. No one should want to root for its demise. So I want to focus on this, that advocacy journalism is a little bit different when it comes to balance and fairness. But we want to ensure when we hit those bigger enterprise stories that the smaller stories that we had created to get to that point are balanced and fair. So again, our communities can trust us when it comes to really big things. Watchdog journalism. So this is a form of investigative journalism where journalists, authors, or publishers of a news publication fact-check and interview political and public figures to increase accountability in democratic governance systems. We know these fellows, most of us should at least. I don't know, again, if they were the founder of it, but they, again, are some of the most notable journalists in the nation. So, or not a nation in history, but also in the nation. They covered the Watergate scandal. So yes, they're pretty important. Okay, so now that I've kind of gone through that, I want all of my students to complete an exercise where they think about somewhere they've been, whether it be their favorite restaurant, a vacation spot, a concert or sports event, etc., and write a 3-paragraph intro for a long-form magazine feature on this subject. Remember to use vivid details and put your readers there with you, but make sure those details correlate and serve a larger purpose. Before I complete this, I want to talk about one last thing, and that's pitches. I don't grade story pitches, and I don't include them in participation. They're really just a way for me to gauge y'all's news judgment, especially as it relates to long-form journalism. As I've noted, not every story is worth 1,200 words, and I don't want y'all to find that out just 2 days before y'all hit deadline, right? So that's why I like to discuss them. That way, y'all don't get over y'all's heads and start freaking out because the story you thought was worth a lot of words ended up being 400 words, or the story you wanted to tell was no longer just a viable option. So that's why I ask, just because I want to be able to redirect you or offer up other stories, maybe narrow them down, refine them a little bit. But I also just don't want a lot of overlap, because by the end of the semester, I'm hoping that we get to a point that I want to submit every single one of y'all stories to an outside organization. So that's the thing about pitches. With that said, if you ever need story ideas, reach out to me. I'm happy to help. Just let me know your areas of interest, but also don't let the lack of sources steer you away from a story idea. I'm happy to connect you with people. I'm happy to answer questions about AP style ahead of time, ahead of your deadline. Anything you need help with regarding your assignment, I'll be there to look over and help, just so if you don't want to deduct points. So, yeah, that is it.